Unionists in the ports are refraining from unloading or handling deliveries of Tesla cars into Sweden. Service of electrical installation at Tesla are not to be performed. Letters and packages to and from Tesla will not be delivered.
So Daniel Swedin is the political editor of ADVERTISERS, which is a Swedish labor news outlet, and they have been covering very extensively the conflict between Tesla and Scandinavian workers. So I wanted to get one of them to come on and talk to me. So Daniel, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
No worries, great to be here.
Yeah, and apologies for mixing up the time. I don't know how that happened, but I told him 11:15 our time, 6:45 his time, which does not make sense at all.
No, it does not. That's not how the time zones work.
That's not how time zones work. So I apologize, Daniel.
I could have checked that up myself. I just trusted in you. That's my last time trusting in you.
That's right. Yeah, you shouldn't trust me. But I appreciate your time talking to us. ADVERTISERS is the name of your organization. What does that mean in English?
The work or the labor.
Okay.
So it's the name is very old in Swedish. Swedish working class, working movement, labor movement history, and it was the name of a newspaper, a daily newspaper that in the early 2000s went broke, and we could take over the name. So our newspaper is almost 100 also, but before we were called LO-tidningen, that's the trade union newspaper. So we wanted to kind of show our roots and also make it more clear that we are not the mouthpiece of the Trade Union Confederation, but we are a newspaper in our own right, covering trade union issues and working place issues. And I'm the political editor, as you said, and in a way, I'm the more. I have a more capacity to talk about. I can take sides.
Right. There you go. Well, taking sides is something that we are in favor of, especially when the sides are workers and bosses. I think those are pretty easy to take the workers' side on. And so brought you on to talk about the Tesla conflict, but I wanted to give folks a background about the Swedish labor model, and you know, I think there's a very similar labor model in the other Scandinavian countries. But can you talk to us about the Swedish labor model and give us just some background and some explanation about what that is and how y'all set up labor relations in your country?
Yeah, just to start with a sort of a historical context, in the early 1930s, Sweden experienced the highest number of labor market conflict days in Europe. And that was conflicts that the politicians were not unable to stop. So in the late 1938, a solution was achieved via the Saltsjöbaden agreement, an agreement concluded directly between employers and employees, and 8 years. And they got together and decided that we are going to make the rules for the labor market. So 8 years after this agreement, Sweden experienced the lowest number of labor market conflict days in Europe, and that stands. And why is that? We like to believe that it is because of this model that we have, and the foundation for that model is the collective agreements. So in Sweden, the total proportion of members of trade unions in Sweden was just under 72% for women last year, and over 65% when you look at the men. And 9 of 10 workers are covered by collective agreements. And as I said, that's the basis of the labor market model in Scandinavia and in Sweden. And this means that the trade unions and the employers' organizations determine the rules of the game in the labor market without interference from the state or politicians. This means that there's no minimum wage in Sweden. There's actually no legislation stipulating the wages should be paid at all. Collective agreements are the only way to define how much a worker should be paid for the work performed in Sweden. And the collective agreements, they include wages, forms of employment, occupational pension, working hours, vacations, and periods of notice.
Oh, go ahead.
That's the basis of it, I like to think.
Right. And I think that makes sense, and that makes it all the more, existential, I guess you could say, when foreign companies try to come in and they try not to follow that Swedish labor model because since there is no minimum wage and there are not very many laws around the workplace, if the labor model of the unions and the employers being able to set the working conditions, if that falls apart, then there's really not much left protecting Swedish workers. And so when foreign companies come in and try to disrupt that, it really becomes an existential threat. And this sort of thing has happened several times in the past. And in particular, it seems like with U.S. companies, they seem to be the main antagonist in these sort of stories. And you were there for and you were around and watching as the situation happened with Toys R Us, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened with Toys R Us?
Toys R Us it's a little too early for my time. I'm only 40 years old, but the Toys R Us situation, it's 20 years ago. So when Toys R Us opened stores in Sweden in 1995, it's almost 30 years ago. They refused to sign a collective agreement with the Commercial Employees Union. And the company argued that they had never signed an agreement of this kind with the union anywhere in the world, and they did not intend to do it in Sweden either. The issue regarding Toys R Us partly revolved around the employer's desire to set salaries arbitrarily. So union members at the Toys R Us stores also sounded the alarm to the union about the anti-democratic personnel culture, where management tried to control employees down to the smallest detail. And many thought in Sweden by the time it was futile to try to fight an international giant corporation. This was just after, as you know, the Berlin Wall had broken down and the whole neoliberal tidal wave, so to speak, was sweeping over. Sweden had just joined the European Union, and the time was, everyone was talking about there's a new time dawning, and the old ways are dying. It's futile to stand up for something that was a thing of the past. But the union, of course, argued that it was impossible to give up, because it would mean that the entire model of collective agreements would be put out of play. And that is also what the industrial and workers' unions are saying about Tesla, which we will talk about more later. But anyway, in May 1995, the Toys R Us stores in Gothenburg and Malmö, that's our second biggest cities in Sweden, went on strike. And after a few days, the strike also spread to Stockholm, our capital city. And the union was criticized by a right-wing press and right-wing politicians, but had very strong support from their own members and also from the citizens of Sweden. The very important thing that happened then is that the other trade unions declared secondary action, or as we call it in Sweden, sympathy measures. So members of the transport workers union refused to deliver to Toys R Us, and white-collar unions like the finance union blocked all economic transactions to and from Toys R Us. And in late summer of that year, the management of Toys R Us gave up, and they signed a collective agreement with the union. But in 2018, the Scandinavian owners of Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy, so they're not in Sweden anymore after all.
Yeah, they went bankrupt in the United States around that time too.
Yeah.
And so what did around that time? What were the right wing press saying? Because unlike in America, like you said, this is really part of the Swedish culture and society, and so it's difficult to imagine people with much of a base getting away with attacking this sort of arrangement. What were they saying, and then what were did they have any sort of base in the public?
Not really. As I said, the citizens supports this model. But what the right-wing press and the right-wing politicians often say when we are striking in Sweden is that, and it's that the secondary action is the big issue here. We don't want any other sectors to be affected by or to go into the conflict. So if it's a conflict at a workshop, why should the cleaners step out, strike in sympathy with them? So that's almost, and that's the same thing you can see with the Tesla conflict now. Secondary action is the kind of the painful thing about the Swedish model for the right-wing press and the right-wing politicians, and also the employers. But it was them that wanted it in the big agreement from the 1930s, because they argued then, 100 years ago, that if we have a secondary action and strong protection from secondary action, the conflicts will be over very fast. So they wanted to have that. So it was their idea to put it into the big agreement from the beginning. But now they are not big fans of it anymore.
Yeah, I could imagine. And so how is it that I wonder what is the sort of rhetoric that your right-wing press and politicians use in Sweden? Because in America, the rhetoric really centers around freedom and liberty and all this kind of stuff. And it's difficult for me to kind of marry this rhetoric around, I'm right wing and that means I love freedom, with I support the government making illegal workers going on sympathy strikes. Right? I mean, that's, being able to go on a sympathy strike is a measure of freedom that we do not legally have in the United States. And so what is what are the arguments that they're putting forward against sympathy strikes? Because it can't be about freedom, because the workers are utilizing their freedom and their liberty to make their opinions and wishes known. You could even say, in a sense, they're voting with their dollars, right? Which is something that capitalists love.
Yeah, but I think the rhetoric is quite the same. There is a kind of a superficial support for the collective agreement, and everyone's saying it's great that the unions are giving employers giving employees and a chance to join the collective agreement. It's not optional, but the thing they are saying that it's getting out of hand when we have secondary action. People who are not in this conflict, it's not about them. Why should they stop to do this and that just to punish a company or an employer who is having something to settle with another union? So it's the same thing that you hear in America, I guess.
Right.
They call it freedom, but we left wing and right wing, our outlook on freedom is not the same, I like to think.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that I think freedom is very important. I'm a big fan of freedom. I'm a big fan of liberty. But I think that it should be the workers who have the freedom and the liberty, and I'm not as concerned with the property rights of the capitalists, their freedom to do with us and our society what they will. So one more question on background, and then I'm interested in diving into the specifics of the Tesla situation, is in America, we have really been seeing a resurgence, at least in interest, of the labor movement. And I don't know how much y'all have been tracking this in Sweden, but in the last year in particular, and less so, but still to a certain extent over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot more interest in labor in the United States. It got up to approval of unions, got up to 70%. It's at almost 90% among people under 30. Lots of people express an interest in joining unions. Double the amount of people went on strike last year as did the year before, and there's just the UAW went on strike last year. They won very lucrative contracts. UPS did the same, or Teamsters did the same at UPS, and so there's a lot of excitement and energy and interest in unions right now in the United States. Is there a similar thing happening in Sweden and then maybe in Scandinavia and Europe more broadly?
I'd say not really, sadly. We can see that unionizing, we have our levers are through the roof historically, but we can see the share of union members are falling down, and especially in the working class businesses, the working class unions. White collar unions are performing very much stronger, and I think that's a problem. Of course, but I think maybe that this kind of strike that you see now with Tesla is maybe it is an argument for people to join. But we have a working market, a labor market that is quite, we are members of the European Union, so our borders and how people can migrate for work is more open now than it was just 20 years ago. And we have a big political discussions about something that we are calling the shadow society. And that's like people who are working, the same issues you have in America, I guess, with migrant workers, people who are working at building sites and all things like that. We had a big accident this week when 5 people died when a lift crashed. That's very big in the news now. So we are having a kind of it's a comeback for the economic workplace issues in a political term. So we are talking about it more now, and we also to that we have the Tesla strike. So it's the shares of the members are getting fewer, but maybe we can have like a epiphany or something, a new interest for these issues and why it's important to be in the union and what the union are, so to speak.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Here's hoping. So let's talk about Tesla then. What's the lay of the land right now with the conflict between Tesla and workers in Sweden and Scandinavia?
Yeah, I start 6 years ago, because that's when the EF Metall, which are the trade union for industrial and metal workers, 6 years ago they started to try to negotiate for a collective agreement with Tesla's subsidiary in Sweden. But they had been turned down, and Tesla said, the subsidiary said that collective agreements are not included in our business model. And during this time, Tesla has grown enormously in Sweden. Tesla cars are increasingly visible on our roads, and new service centers and workshops have been established all over the country. And the issue is just not about a handful of service technicians anymore. The union are saying that if we let a large company like Tesla get away, if they do not sign a collective agreement, it becomes very difficult to motivate others to have collective agreements. And the Swedish model has an Achilles heel. If it is to work and have, it requires that the vast majority of employees are covered. We are talking about it sometimes as a house of cards. If you pull out a card, it is easy for the whole house to collapse. And this conflict comes at a time when more large American companies, such as Amazon, are establishing themselves in Sweden, and where the collective bargaining model is challenged by so-called gig jobs, where companies try to claim that their drivers or bicycle couriers are not employees, but independent contractors. So that's the background for all of this. So when EF Metall issued its strike notice in early October, it did not so only to secure the condition for these 130-some service technicians. From the union's point of view, the conflict is also necessary to secure the survival of the Swedish model, just as when we talked about the Toys R Us strike. So they felt compelled to take action before it was too late. And the thing that happened then is when Tesla, in violation with European Union legislation, they began mapping out who was in the union and who would strike. And then it emerged that strike breakers would be called in. And that made the whole trade union movement mad. And now we have a big wave of secondary actions in Sweden. Unionists in the ports are refraining from unloading or handling deliveries of Tesla cars into Sweden. Reparations or service of electrical installation at Tesla or their charging stations are not to be performed. Tesla's workshops won't be cleaned. Letters and packages to and from Tesla will not be delivered. All upcoming service work and construction in their workshops will be halted. Painting and repainting of cars will be halted, and their trash will not be picked up. And we see Finnish, Danish, and Norwegian unions has announced secondary actions and a blockade against Tesla. No Tesla cars will go through Finland, Norway, and Denmark to Sweden. So there is where it stands now. Everyone is striking, it seems.
One of the small wins that Tesla was hoping to get among these, sympathy measures was against the postal unions. They were hoping to get the Swedish government to say, basically that postal service is a government service, and so therefore they cannot, the postal service workers cannot be involved in these sympathy measures, and they have to do this government service regardless of whatever else is my understanding. And feel free to fill in any details or correct any misunderstandings. But the Swedish court said no, they can strike you. Basically, is my understanding of what happened. Talk to us about how that case played out.
Yeah, there is a legal dispute. It's not over yet, but it revolves around the Tesla are suing the Postal Service for not delivering registration plates that Tesla ordered from the Swedish Transport Agency, and the Swedish Transport Agency is the agency that are producing registration plates. And the reason that the Postal Service are not delivering is that members of unions organizing postal workers are engaging in sympathy strikes with the industrial union. So there's been in different courts since like 3 weeks, and now there came yesterday the high court, but the step under said that you cannot have the registration plates. So Tesla has not won anything in this legal dispute. But when it will be solved at the highest level, the unions are not to be in the courthouse. So they are not. They cannot talk about it, or their view will not be listened to. So it's a conflict with Tesla and the postal service, so to speak. So it's out of the hands of the unions.
Right. Right. Okay, I see. And how is Tesla responding so far?
Yeah, they are not saying anything. There was in late October, I think, they wanted to meet the unions to talk about this again. But the understanding from the unions is that this is not in the hands of the subsidiary that is in Sweden. This is something that the Americans or maybe Elon Musk himself will decide upon. So I don't know. And we were very excited in Sweden when he finally tweeted something or xed something about the issues in Sweden, and he called it crazy. And that the thing he called crazy was the fact that the registration plates could not be delivered. So that's the only thing we know that he has said in public. But nothing is really happening. The latest thing that happened yesterday was that the unions that are unionizing cleaners said that the trash the trash. They said that after Christmas you will not have any trash delivered or taken out anymore. So that's their workshops will look like pigsties in the new year. So I don't know how long they can hold out. And there is, of course, discussion in Sweden and in the Swedish unions of what is a win for us in this when things stand as they are. Many people do believe that Tesla will not yield, so they will leave Sweden, and maybe that's a price that the unions are willing to pay.
I mean, there are other electric car makers. I think, so I think it would be unfortunate, but I agree. I think that, or I agree with their assessment that it would be a price worth paying if that's what happens. I'm curious if there's any, and I guess this question is sort of psychologizing a little bit, but Elon Musk really seems like a kind of a unique, erratic character among the owning class. I think that, and I wonder if that difference, or if there is a difference, but I wonder if that's being discussed among in Sweden, as a difference between Tesla and Toys R Us or McDonald's. McDonald's and Toys R Us both went through similar situations where these sympathy measures were enacted and they ended up capitulating. But my view of organizations and companies like Tesla and Toys or like Toys R Us and McDonald's would be more that they're less ideological and they just want to make money, right? And so if that's kind of my understanding. And so if it is the case that signing a collective agreement in Sweden is how we're going to be able to make the most money, then I'll sign a collective agreement. But it seems like Elon Musk is really maybe less driven by just making money and is more a real kind of erratic ideologue who would be willing to forego money so that he can maintain his ego or something. Is that being discussed?
Somewhat, it's being discussed. There are some in the right-wing press, some people who are really his fanboys and like talking about him as he's changing the world. We cannot have Swedish workers stop this change maker on his big mission to make a transition to green energy with his cars. And they are calling the unions mafia and things like that. But from I think you have a point, because if you ask a Swedish capitalist, they'd say in a well-functioning market economy, we want to compete on equal terms. And the collective agreement in Sweden gives companies that opportunity. No one should be able to gain cost advantages by dumping wages. Competition assumes that the rules of the games are agreed upon. And for the time being, I mean, there are ideologically driven capitalists and employers in Sweden also. But as you said, if this is the way we're making money in Sweden, and we have like 9 out of 10 workplaces that are covered by collective agreements, it's the name of the game. And the collective agreement is just a floor that you stand on. You can do whatever you want if you just sign it. And the thing that happens when you sign a collective agreement is that you as an employer are joining a employer's organization. So that's, you get support from them with all things, like just as a worker that is unionizing, your company can also unionize, so to speak, when you join this. That's the thing also. So you get support from other capitalists, other businessmen.
Right. Well, how is the public reacting?
There was a big poll maybe a month ago, and the people are, they are support. I think like 70% are supporting the strike. And I know we don't strike that much in Sweden, but there is also, when this secondary action are coming into place, and people are now, Tesla owners are feeling that, what the fuck, I can't have my car repaired, and they are of course getting angry. But the answer from the union and from people like me are like, the easiest way for you to have your car repaired is that you, the owner or the producer of your car are signing the collective agreement.
Right.
But I think the support is really high, and there's like the strike, since we don't strike that much in Sweden anymore, there's a energizing feel about it. Or for the first time in a very long time, we are fighting for something that we in the left wing and the labor movement has not done for quite a long time.
Right.
So it's energizing the left wing in Sweden, but the public supports the strike.
Well, good deal. Well, it's energizing for us over here, and we look forward to seeing hopefully a happy resolution, and ideally them signing these collective agreements, and that may hopefully pave the way for the UAW here to be able to make similar gains and secure similar agreements. So
yeah, absolutely. I just think it's such an important struggle, and I applaud the unions in Sweden and Scandinavia for standing together, and applaud the workers for standing up, because it is a threat to the system. And, we can't allow these corporations to move from country to country to country looking for loopholes, looking for ways to exploit us, and trying to duck and dodge unions. So I really applaud the Swedish workers, the Scandinavian workers for doing this. It's important. And I think it is going to have ramifications on, the labor movement across the globe, across the world. All of us are affected by this.
I can let you know that today news broke that 16 major Nordic institutional investors have sent a letter to Tesla urging that the company reconsider its current stance on the union. The investors are, I quote, deeply concerned about the current conflict in Sweden. And
Danish investors have, the Danish pension fund has already divested from Tesla.
Yeah. And this is the Norwegian pension fund, and these 16 investors are saying that if Tesla do not change its position, it may be necessary to sell the shares in the company and leave the ownership. But that's the last resort. So there's a pressure from kind of the whole society against Tesla right now. So it's really fascinating to see this play out.
Daniel Swedin, political editor of Arbetet in Sweden. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, appreciate that. Really cool to hear from our international comrades and just hear what's going on in other countries. It's easy for us in America to get in our own little silos and not think about what's happening elsewhere. But these companies think globally. So labor has to think globally. It's very important, and really, I applaud them for real. It's that's inspiring. That everyone from the trash collectors to the mailmen to the port workers, everyone getting involved and taking a stand for their fellow worker. And I think that is just really inspiring, and it's obvious why these sympathy strikes are illegal in the United States. It would be, it's funny, the employers there in Sweden recognize the fact that this gives workers a lot more leverage, and therefore these disputes will be resolved quicker. But I would agree with that, right? But obviously, American employers are going to push back against any rights that we can fight for, any power that we can build. But that's something that we need to get changed in our laws. And I know people like to talk about the most pro-labor administration of all time, supposedly, that we have in the White House. But I haven't heard the president say that sympathy strikes should be legalized.
Right.
I would love to hear political candidates start to talk that language and put the power back into the hands of working people.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.